What is up? Welcome to the American Peloton. I am Jonathan Crane. I'm a mediocre Cat 2 cyclist out of Birmingham, Alabama.
And I'm Ben, head coach at Skyway Cycling and team director at Skyway, presented by Domestique Coffee.
Yeah, we had a big week with Skyway Domestique Team Camp Week.
That was a blast. A lot of cool announcements.
What can we talk about? You want to throw a couple out there?
Kind of our focus for this year is we've kind of been a regional team for a while, I guess 2 years. And so we're kind of going to step up to the national races a bit more. We've got some really cool sponsor support helping us get to like Tulsa and then all of the USA Crits races as well, and that's kind of freeing up some of the guys' personal budget to make it to some of the West Coast ACC races. So it's going to be really awesome hitting more of the national races and really focusing more on crits. Shout out to like Domestique Coffee and Vineyard Brands for helping us make it to those races, and some other really cool partners. Hosking Bikes. We had Chloe Hosking on a few episodes ago, and they're helping us out with bikes this year. Once Upon a Coconut. We're kind of like beverage racing. We've got like coconut water.
Yeah, Team Camp was awesome. We had so much like Domestique Coffee in the morning, coconut water, beers after the ride. Like we were flush with beverages, and yeah, I can't wait to get the Hosking bike in here and build it up and make some non-podcast YouTube content about it. They are making an aluminum aero bike spec'd with carbon wheels, power meter, 12-speed electronic group set. That's like half the cost of other. I actually looked the other day, and like their base model has higher level components than a specialized Allay Sprint base model, and it comes in at like 2/3 of the price, close to half the price. And
Yep.
I don't think it's been in a wind tunnel yet, but my guess is, looking at the frame, that it's probably as aerodynamic, if not more, than an Allay. So, and the
Yep.
paint is cooler.
Having an aluminum bike is just so beneficial because we crash so often that if you're running carbon, you might be replacing a frame or two a year.
Yeah, how many guys on our team last year were running like a CAD, or at least some bike like that with a dented top tube? Like
Like 3 or 4.
me, Alex, yeah, it was a pretty large portion. I also like, I don't know if these are like live yet, but they are making an all-road bike, and I think they're gonna sell some that are spec'd out the box with the new microshift group set, which is pretty cool. Yeah, it totally aligns with like kind of what I do on the YouTube channel, trying to like figure out how people can race well and not spend their entire paycheck. Anyway, enough about us. It's off season, and you wouldn't think there'd be that much, but like, at Team Camp, I feel like we probably did 2 podcasts worth of material just talking about all the stuff that's going on
Absolutely, especially
in the
when you have like
transfer market.
10 guys with the peanut gallery going. It's like, oh
Yeah,
yeah,
we maybe should have just brought the mics to Team Camp, although I don't know if the noise reduction is quite that good.
would have been chaos.
Yeah. So let's
Plus,
filter it down right
plus,
now
who
to
knows
the
what would
important
have been
stuff.
said that would have gotten us taken off YouTube or something like banter.
It gets dark out there 5-6 hours in. Anyway, so the hot thing that we were talking about, obviously, Cory Williams is leaving Legion, which I feel like would be potentially a bigger story if he was going to any other team, but he's going to Blazers, which is the other team that he and Justin own. So it's kind of like, it's a big story, I guess, because he's been so connected to that team in people's minds, but also not a huge, it's like organizationally under that like Williams Racing umbrella or whatever.
Yeah, it's still part of that Williams Racing development. Like, so Williams Racing Development is who like owns Legion, Blazers, and Austin, and
Hmm.
so it's still under that umbrella. It just seems like a lateral move. Like it's not
Yeah.
revolutionary.
So it is like interesting in the context of everything else going on with Blazers. So it feels like, and this is what a lot of people have said to us and what people were saying at camp too, is like it feels like Legion and Blazers are trying to even the rosters out.
Yep.
So a lot of good riders are going across with Cory Williams. They've also picked up Corey Lockwood, someone we've talked about on the podcast. He was on Matt Winstead's YouTube channel pretty recently, but current amateur time trial national champion, races out of the Southeast. So we have seen him around. have raced him here and there in the last couple of years, but super strong guy, really good pickup for them. Was on Legion several years ago.
Yep.
They're moving this both of the Schneider sisters over to Blazers from Legion. Another like very connected to Legion, in the
Yep.
public eye.
And
Eder
then
Frere,
yeah,
Gavin
I was say Eder
Hoover.
Frere. Yeah.
Yeah, they're all moving to Blazers from Legion. That's We talked a lot about how last year they didn't have a ton of results. They had Monk got the national championship on the amateur side, and then Johnny Brown had some good results the weekend of Snake Alley. Johnny Brown actually seems to be there's no announcement. He's not on the roster that I have seen for Blazers. It seems like he's maybe a free agent, which I don't know. Maybe a weird move for one of the only guys that like we remember a result from him last year, but also
Yeah.
they're making room for a lot of talent there. So
Yeah, it seems like Johnny Brown being kind of quiet on it maybe indicates a big move that's still not finalized. Or like I know a lot of the folks on the Legion adjacent teams that have been renewed and are still staying, like just haven't made announcements about it. So like even with like Aviators have been super super quiet. Like they've not made
mm-hmm.
any. They haven't really posted since what, November, as a team, like on the team
yeah,
Instagram.
there's been nothing from them as a team on any social media
And
since
yeah,
23.
yeah, and like I know like on some of the guys' personal Instagrams, like I was doing some snooping. Like Connor White still has Aviators in the in his bio, and so like Lucas Bourillon, I assume that's how you pronounce his last name,
It's close
is
enough, yeah.
still has him in his bio. So I don't know if it's like Aviators just doesn't have that many changes, or if they're dropping something later down. Maybe Johnny Brown, if they're shuffling the Williams Racing development rosters, maybe they're moving him over to Aviators to help balance that out too. I don't know.
Yeah, could be. I have heard that Aviators is potentially losing Iman Lucas, although he hasn't made an announcement yet. That's just kind of like in the rumor mill. So I don't know. Yeah, it would surprise me. I mean, it's a tough sponsor market. We've talked about that a lot, and especially with endemic sponsors like bike industry sponsors and anything that is sort of athletics related, those sponsors tend to not have everything is seeing a downturn. There was that big COVID uptick and everything is sloping back off, and I think it's like it takes a year for those things to catch up, and we're just at like a low point. So
Yep.
Legion had and all of the teams across their portfolio, most of their sponsors were endemic stuff. So I think they're probably on a significantly leaner, and all of the problems that have or like PR nightmare incidents that we've talked about on this channel probably factoring in there as well.
Yep.
Factoring in, that's a good
Speaking
yeah.
of factoring in, there was a photo leaked of Justin on a Factor Ostro van. So
Mm-hmm.
sounds like Legion possibly is riding Factor bikes this year.
Yeah, it looks like Legion on Factor, which would maybe make the rumor we've heard, and this is another like allegedly unconfirmed in the rumor mill. Factor Legion is going to Factor, and the NCL teams are leaving Factor, and we haven't seen a lot of sponsor release stuff from NCL teams at all. So I wonder if they're still hammering something out or figuring out what they're going to do for this season bike wise.
It's very, very late in January for teams to not be like, hey, this is what we're doing this year.
Mm-hmm.
And I even noticed like way back, like 2018, 2019, even 2020, at least in my experience, if I didn't have an agreement signed by the end of October, the company was like, well, we don't have any more marketing budget for next year. Like, we're
Yeah,
booked.
right.
And it seems like even this year, it could be that I'm more aware of it than I used to be, just from running a team and like doing this show.
Mm-hmm.
But sponsor agreements have been established a lot later this year than they have been previous, and so I think a
Yeah,
lot of teams are still like figuring a lot of that stuff out and working on agreements still.
right.
Because I was signing stuff like on December 31st, so
Right. Later
I
than you want
imagine,
to. Yeah.
yeah. So I imagine a lot of stuff was still up in the air, which is very late, which is kind of indicating of the economy,
Yeah,
because maybe
definitely.
brands are like, oh, we don't know what the budget looks like yet, so
Right.
we
They're
got to
trying to
hold
maybe
back.
figure out where they can cut some spending, and ambassador programs and sponsorships and stuff might be a place they feel like they can do that. Before we fully move on to NCL, which it feels like we're there already, I want to just talk about a couple of the implications for the Legion Blazers thing. Legion is picking up Danny Estevez, which is a huge pickup for them, and Holek from HPH. It looks like both of the
Nice.
Blazers and the Legion women's squad are going to 4-person squads. So like very strong 4-person squads, but maybe I don't know, it's hard to say with like the Schneider sisters being on the same squads and being so limited. It just takes like one or two injuries, and then, maybe a DNA who's fully staffed up has full squads at races, and
Yep.
Virginia's Blue Ridge. Like we may see a little bit more even racing on the women's side this year, especially
Yep.
if Blazers and Legion are really duking it out. And to that end, everybody's saying it feels like Legion had all this success last year. They moved some people over to Blazers who had maybe undershot it given their like budget and the amount of talent they have had. It feels like they may have overdone it. I actually think that this may be the year of Blazers in terms of those two teams. I think Blazers might shine a little bit more.
I agree on the women's side for sure.
Oh, I think so on the
Um,
men's side because I think,
really,
I mean, I'm looking at this list, and okay, let's also talk about, we talked about who's going to these teams, but Legion is also losing, scrolling down my list here,
they're losing Sam Boardman and
Sam
Tyler
Boardman and Tyler
Williams.
Williams. And I would really say that
Yep.
like the three people that did the most just like donkey work on the front, I mean, the Legion thing that we all think of where they line up on the front and they rotate two or three guys to keep the pace the whole race. That was
Yep.
Sam Boardman gone, Tyler Williams gone, and Ty Magner, who they still have. But I don't know
Yep.
if you can replace those other two engines. And Ty is very strong, but I don't know if he can do 3 times the amount of pulls he was.
You don't think Danny Estevez is helping fill that a bit?
He's like a different kind of rider, so we'll see if he
Yeah.
slots into that role. And it's also like changing they had sort of found a winning formula with like people knowing their roles. And I also think that at this point it feels like of the Justin and Cory, like Cory is a little more hungry of a sprinter than Justin. So I feel like
True.
Justin seems, and I like you can relate to this, and this is just what I'm
Yeah.
getting from social media and stuff. But Justin seems like he's a little bit bogged down in the business side of running a team, and
Yeah.
like a little bit less focused on the racing.
Yeah.
So maybe Estevez is going to be their sprinter this year. I mean, that's also
Yeah.
not out of the realm of possibility.
That's definitely possible. I'm just thinking like I think the men's teams are going to be about equal. Like I think they're going to be really duking it out more, but I think like the Blazers women this year will be a lot better.
Oh, definitely, yeah. The
Yeah.
Blazers women are going to be stepping up in a big way. But again, both of them with four people. It'll be interesting to see if they can like as these new combinations and as 4-person squads, given that everyone is well and in good health and good legs at the same time, if they're even able to break through in the way that Legion has done the last couple of years. It's definitely going to be interesting. One of the big factors they're going to have to overcome is that both of the NCL teams are making some pretty big pickups as well. So,
Yeah.
like on the men's and the women's side, I think both teams have really strengthened their rosters.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously we mentioned Tyler Williams is going to Miami, which was like a huge workhorse for Legion. You got Will Harden going to Miami, who's like a huge workhorse lead out for Project Echelon. I was getting Colin Joyce from Human Powered Health and Robert
Hmm.
Sierra as well.
Yeah, and then they've got this guy Thomas Galindez that I don't know anything about, but
Yeah.
it seems like if they're making pickups at this point, like they made room on their roster so that they could make some big gets this year. Um,
Yep.
their women's team is more consistent with what their women's team was last year, but their women's team also did really well last year, so maybe they don't need to make a ton of changes there. They've still got Andrea Sear, only a couple additions, and no one that I see that's like, oh, that's the huge game changer, but maybe they didn't necessarily need a massive game changer. It does seem like both rosters, I haven't done a side by side count, but it seems like maybe they're one or two less people than they were last year.
I think so. They definitely slimmed down, which we kind of talked about earlier, as
Mm-hmm.
far as trimming some of the fat from the teams. But as far as their women's team goes, like they have a good formula. Like there's no reason to break something that isn't broken or fix
Yeah.
something that isn't broken. So I think like Miami Knights, they're going to be really really good this year. I think the men's team may not be as dominant as they were last year, with losing some of the major players there.
Mm-hmm.
Those being like Alfredo Rodriguez and Brian Gomez. We'll
And
see.
some of the guys that were doing work early on, that
Yeah,
Gabe Mendez. Same thing with the women actually though. They lost Taylor Cook White, who was like one of the people that we saw getting into early moves, like animating the race early on. I wonder if they like, looked at a results spreadsheet and said anybody kind of below here we're cutting. Maybe not.
that
I,
was
I don't know if that's how the decision was made, but if it was.
so that was my thought
Mm-hmm.
when I saw like who was left off, because you had somebody like Gabe Mendez who was doing a ton of work, getting in a lot of breaks, like on the front of Athens with 5 to go,
Mm-hmm.
drilling it, helping them get the result they got there, and then all of a sudden he's gone.
Yeah.
And I feel like it was one of those things where it's like kind of a slap in the face where, okay, your job here is to be a role player, but then at the end of the year they go, well, you didn't get enough top tens, so
Mm-hmm.
we're not keeping you. And it's like, well, that wasn't my job.
And they right. I maybe again, like we don't know that
Maybe,
that's how the
allegedly.
decision.
This
Sure,
is, yeah,
this is speculation. This is the thing about like I feel like if this was basketball, we could like speculate wildly about all this stuff and
right.
no one would bat an eye at it because that's just what you do with basketball. But cycling is treated as this like participatory sport in a different way where we don't talk about it in these terms.
Right.
Or we do, but like in general, people do not.
The, yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I mean, some of those role players have been replaced. Colin Joyce coming from Human Powered Health. I think that's one of those names that like because HPH did a lot of racing and that team's going away. So we're gonna see as we go down the line those riders kind of sprinkled in on all these teams. Or HPH men's team is going away, so that a lot of those guys are getting picked up elsewhere. But yeah, he's been doing some super hard racing in Europe. So maybe a guy that like his name isn't ringing a lot of bells for our listeners or viewers. Maybe going to be outperforming what people would think. And, you know,
100%.
and Clever
Absolutely.
Martinez has been racing a ton of track in the off season. So I think he's going to come in really early, really sharp. For my prediction is that he's going to be good at USA Crits.
Yep.
Yeah, clicking on the schedule section of their website, we got nothing from them. And then the same thing is also true of Denver, which I guess it makes the most sense to go there next, huh?
So for Denver, they got a really, really good pickup. Ben Oliver from MitoQ, who we talked
Mm-hmm.
about around Intelligentsia last year. They were like pretty much the dominant team there.
Yeah,
So it's
New Zealand rider.
huge. Yeah, huge one. I think he's going to be really, really dominant, and
Mm-hmm.
a huge factor in a lot of the races.
Yeah, that's a really big pickup for them. And we talked to a couple other uh, team directors and people in the Peloton who were really impressed with him. I think coming from New Zealand, a little bit of an unknown quantity. So yeah, really good pickup. Although they also did have a pretty tough loss with Riley Sheehan going to Israel Premier Tech. They
Yep.
tried to sign him. They tried to re-sign him before he went to stage with Israel, and then he won that stage, and it was like, well, they probably got a
Yeah.
good chunk of change contract buyout.
Oh, absolutely. Riley Shannon was one of those guys where he went to Denver, but you kind of knew that his heart and focus was going to be
Mm-hmm.
the European stage racing 1 day classics. So it kind of makes sense for him, career wise, to kind of jump over to Israel Premier Tech. But Denver's definitely going to miss him in a lot of his antics in the crits.
Yeah, and on Denver, we've also got another of those HPH, Stephen Bassett, who we saw racing in the Southeast, super strong. I mean, all of these guys are strong when compared with
Right.
us when we jump into the pro 1-2 fields and are put up against these guys. But yeah, definitely going really well, and see seems to be devoted to like converting himself to a crit guy and racing in America after a couple of years in Europe. So
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
good pickup for them.
One thing I will say is we had two guys on our team rolling in a break with Stephen Bassett at Carter County. So,
That's true. Yeah, in
we're
the crit at Carter County Omnium.
yeah. But they
Which
also brought on Cooper Johnson, who's the U23 national champ. He was on Hagens Berman's
mhm.
last year, so that's a really really good pickup as well.
I think he got that national championship when he was with Avolo 2 years ago. I think he is 20, like race age 24 this year, so he's kind of aging out of all of those junior
Yep.
development teams and U23 teams. But yeah, coming through Action and Avolo, that's kind of like the best of the best in terms of American road development pipeline stuff. So yeah, I expect big things from him. And then looking at their pickups, like him, that's a name where like he is really good, but not a name you've heard a ton of. And same thing with Grant Coots, a
Yep.
rider that I only know because I watched the UCI Track Champions League while I'm riding the trainer when that was on GCN Plus. RIP. Those were really fun to watch. But yeah, another guy who's
Yep.
like been racing at an international level, not a name you would necessarily know unless you were doing that. So it feels like they're kind of Disruptors is like reaching out and getting either people who have been racing in Europe or like they're bringing talent that's been in Europe back to America and kind of moneyballing it a little bit. Same thing with Riley McMullen
Yep.
from New Zealand
Yep.
national team.
Yep, absolutely. And then they had a really interesting signing, Grace Arlinson, who was
Mm-hmm.
on automatic, getting brought over as well. Pretty cool. I think, Disruptors, they've kind of been more of a stage racy type of team over the, like last year, they definitely were.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this year, maybe they're starting to rein it in and find that crit formula with this current team while also
Yeah,
keeping that, you know, European road race focus a little bit as well.
right. It seems like they're balancing it out a little bit so that they'll, and not that they were like bad in crits last year, it's just that they were better in road races than crits. But neither of these teams have put out a schedule, so we can't say where they will be or a list of sponsors. Interestingly, like looking at both of those websites and their Instagram profiles, that's where you put the
Yep.
sponsors, and there's nothing from either of them. You mentioned that pickup to automatic, so I think that's where I want to go next. You mentioned Grace Arlinson, who went from the automatic women's squad over to Denver Disruptors. It feels to me like the automatic men's squad is almost all, from what they've announced, it's almost all re-sign the same guys, and they're trying to kind of like build that squad.
Yep.
Not in terms of acquiring new people, but in terms of like getting them race experience and learning to work as a team and like actually developing the power of those people. I think all of them are coached by Gibbons, who runs the team now. So I
Yep.
think he has some faith that he can continue to develop those riders. But on the women's side, it feels like they are just building a whole new team around Kim Stoveld, which is a rider we talked about a lot last year, and maybe a
Yep.
wise move because she had kind of came out of nowhere with some crazy results last year. So they're
Yep.
almost their entire women's squad is new this year.
Which is nice, which is sick because like Kim Stoveld really like in the back half of the year like came out with some crazy results. The interesting thing about automatic to me this year is not so much their roster. It's
Mm-hmm.
more about what races they're doing. So they are one of the few teams that have released their full 2024 schedule,
Mm-hmm.
and it's none of the races that you would expect them to be doing.
Yeah,
Well, almost none of them.
almost none. Yeah, they're doing Tucson early in February. Well, I say early. We're
Hmm.
racing earlier than that. We'll be at Swamp Classic like I'll be at Swamp Classic like a month before, but February, anytime in February is early to be road racing.
Yeah.
They're doing Tucson though, which is a stage race, not a crit. They've got a camp after that. It looks like they're going to Tucson and then staying to do camp in Arizona. They are doing Athens Twilight. That's like the one you would probably, expect. Another stage race. Somerville, Joe Martin, they're doing the stage race. They are doing Toad and Armed Forces Cycling Classic. So that's a little crit block they've got in June. June is like crit month for them, I guess.
Yeah.
Then they're going to Belgium in August and doing Green Mountain in September. So, yeah, that's like mostly stage races if you look at the race days.
Which is kind of the opposite of where all the other teams are going. Uh, Everyone else is focusing more and more on crits, and they're kind of going the other way with it.
And it's really different for them. Like they've always kind of been crit forward to this point and kind of done stage races just when they make sense.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's a strategy, like I was saying, to kind of like develop to get some big days and big miles into some of these younger, especially on the guys' team, into their legs and get some experience for them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also, Gibbons, I think Gibbons' focus is Olympic track. He's been racing with the USA squad down in New Zealand this past week. They were doing road races, but it is the team that is like the USA track team. So yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. I wonder if he's trying to like suss out a new leader or make a new leader from those guys, or yeah, I don't know.
That's yeah. You kind of because I was like, what in the world are they doing? You kind of pitched that theory to me, and I think it makes a lot of sense with him kind of going more in the track direction. And I know some of the other automatic guys are starting to kind of like I know Ashton Dreer is like looking more and more into doing track as well, and I think they're just kind of not that Ashton's been a leader on the team, but I think they're all just kind of in a growth period trying to figure out
Hmm.
what automatic is going to look like moving forward.
Right. It was a team that was built around Thomas, around getting
Yep.
Tom to win, and now that he is taking more of a like road captain role in the team, what we heard last year is that he was less interested in being the guy and more interested in helping his guys win. And then he's
Yep.
also wants to go to the Olympics, I think. So, that's a focus. It is interesting to me though that you would be doing, and maybe there's like a coaching principle behind this, but that you would be doing such long like stage race type stuff and also track, like maybe they're trying to find a balance. I would just think that the easier analog would be a bunch of crits. Maybe it's the calculus is like, if I'm going to the Olympics, I don't want to do a bunch of crits that are known for being a higher percent chance of crashing. Like you can maybe
Yep.
control that a little bit more if you're road racing, a little bit less likely. Although we saw some big road race crashes even in the uphill stages last year. So
Yeah, I'd say road racing is not necessarily any safer because you kind of get those lulls where no one's really paying attention because you're
mm-hmm.
not riding hard, and then all of a sudden you overlap wheels, and there's no corners to kind of break that up.
The corners you do get, you're not seeing them multiple times often as well.
Hmm.
So like, a lot of times the road narrows and no one's expecting it or whatever, and guys are off in the ditch because it went from 4 lanes to 2 lanes, or you do some amount of recon, but I guarantee you that teams are not driving every inch of GMSR before it happens and stuff like that.
I also think it's less like from a coaching standpoint. Obviously, the more hard days you get in and structure them well and do the recovery, like the stronger you'll get over the course of a year. But I think if I'm looking at their year from last year,
Mm-hmm.
the races they got results in, it was like Tour of Newport News. It was some of these like multi-day kind of stage racy crit series, and then
Mm-hmm.
also some of the stage races. And I think like for automatic, if you're getting sponsored from getting money from Avis, you're getting BMC bikes, whatever bike they're on. They're
I think
also
they're
looking
on
at getting
BMC.
results. Like
Yeah.
their sponsors want results, and so it's like, well, you have to pivot to, well, this is where we've been getting results. We need to, follow that too.
Yeah, that definitely could be part of it. So it'll be interesting to see what they do this year and see how much of them we actually get to see, because they will not be at a lot of the races that have streams and at a lot of the races that we will be at. We'll be following along via social media and all that. We talked about HPH folding. I want to talk about a couple of the other teams, and we've really been talking in terms of who is going where more so than where they're coming from. And I thought about structuring this episode in terms of like who's gaining and who's losing. But when I
Yeah.
looked at the losing side, I feel like actually it seems like almost every team is just getting stronger as a result of the tighter sponsor market. There are less teams, but there are the same amount of strong riders. So they're just like being consolidated into
Yeah.
teams. So HPH gone. ACG also appears to be on the way out. Potentially
Possibly a
Aviators.
merger.
Yeah, yeah, possible.
Possibly a merger there. So like I don't know if their riders are totally out of a job necessarily, but
Hmm. Yeah, it seems like the
yeah.
plurality, with the exception of Estevez, the plurality of those riders may stay together as a package deal. Yeah, and then HPH guys going elsewhere. There are a few people without contracts, which sucks to see. Gage Hecht is a big one that comes to mind. I just saw him at Cross Nationals in the HPH kit. My hope
Yeah.
is that he just comes back to Cross, though. I do.
Yeah.
This is an outside our scope kind of thing, but I think next year is going to be the year of people coming back to Cross. I think we're getting Kerry Werner, Becca Faringer. I think a lot of people who did Lifetime the last year or two, both because of the sponsor market contracting and them not being able to find as much on Lifetime, and then also just like how grueling that season is.
It's also expensive. I think
Yeah,
kind of the numbers that I've heard is like it costs anywhere between $40,000 and $50,000 to do the Lifetime Grand Prix and nothing else.
right.
When you look at everything you need equipment wise, travel,
Mm-hmm.
lodging, everything.
And you can say like, oh, well, it's expensive to do cyclocross. From a gear perspective, you need, whatever,
Yeah.
two, three bikes, multiple wheel sets, but that's the stuff that is easiest to get out of a sponsor. Like getting travel
Hmm.
fees covered, that's harder to get out of a sponsor.
Yeah.
I mean, right? Like in your
Yeah.
experience, it's a lot
Yeah,
harder
like
to get cash.
if you're Kerry Werner and you're going to X bike company and you're saying, "Hey, I've been on the national championship podium in this discipline 10 times. I'm doing this calendar of races. Can you get me 2 frames?" They're not
Mm-hmm.
going to say no to him necessarily. So it gets easier, but when you say, "Hey, I want 2 frames and I need $10,000." They're going to be like, "We might be able to give you 2,000
Mm-hmm.
maybe."
And you might
And
say
that's
like,
where it gets tough.
what's the difference because you're traveling to the cross races? I think for a lot of the guys based in the East Coast, it's a difference of flying versus driving. Like there's
Hmm.
so much more. Really, there's a lot of stuff you could do on the West Coast. If you're up near Portland, there's a whole like high level series you can do up there. But from a like most of the what has been the kind of pro series is drivable from
Yeah.
a centrally located. Again, Kerry Werner is the example, being in like North Carolina, I think, but he can get up
Yeah.
to Massachusetts, Connecticut, down to the UCI race in Georgia. Like you can drive all that
It's
rather than fly.
it's also just way easier to moneyball a cross season.
Mm-hmm.
Like it because there's so much density on the East Coast where it's like, let's say you have a big block of racing in November. You can find a couch to crash on for 2 weeks while you're racing 5 of those races, and then
Mm-hmm.
you go back for a week or two and do the same thing with Lifetime. Because, like, for example, if you're going to do Leadville, if you want to be competitive at Leadville, you have to spend 4 to 6 weeks at altitude.
Uh huh.
You've got to come up with the food, lodging for that, which is not
Yeah.
cheap.
Right, but because those races, this is the other point I wanted to make, is that like a lot of the cross races are in metro areas where it's easier to get to. They're closer to a big airport, whereas a lot of the, by design, the big like destination gravel races are out in the middle of nowhere. So they're not close to an airport. They're not close to a lot of lodging necessarily. So the chances that you just like know somebody in an adjacent city you can crash with or can find like a cheap Airbnb. Everything in Kansas is getting jacked up around Unbound and everything's getting booked. Like same thing with Leadville. Like
Yeah.
you're not finding a steal of a deal around Leadville because there's just not a bunch of housing around there. So yeah, I think
Right.
your dollar goes a little bit farther in cyclocross. Yeah, I'm interested to see who all we get back in the
Yeah.
cyclocross world. So Gage Hecht,
My
build out that privateer program and get back in cyclocross next year.
but the rumor that I had heard was that he's going to stay, like, because Human Powered Health was based out of Spain
Mm-hmm.
when they were over there. The rumor that I've been hearing is that he's going to be staying in Spain, trying to, like, hoping to find a road team out there.
Mm.
I'd rather see him race cross because he made the cross races a lot more interesting, but
It could be both
we'll
though.
see.
I mean,
Could be both.
maybe he finds a Spanish team. He was certainly home around the holidays and raced USA Nats this year. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe a situation like that could work where you can find a team to race with for the road season. And since the hybrid program is much more popular than it used to be in terms of like racing road and cross, I mean, we just
Yeah.
had another big three, not to date our record, but we had the last World Cup today where we were going to have Pidcock, Wout, and MVDP all at the same. And I think those guys have set an example for people that like you can be multidisciplinary, and it also may be beneficial to race cross in some of your off seasons from a
Mhm.
development perspective.
Well, I just think the science, like the old adage for coaching was like, never touch your big ring in the winter, like only ride
Mm-hmm.
easy. And then I think those three have kind of like in the research has come out like, hey, throwing some intensity in during your winter actually helps you.
Yeah,
And so I think that's kind of why people are starting to open up more to doing both.
which is funny
But
because like the original cross guys knew that. That's like why
yeah,
cross exists is road racers needed a
yep,
way to stay fit in the winter. It's very cold, so they didn't. Gear was bad back then. They wanted to be out there for a shorter period of time, going slower with higher resistance, so on the grass. But yeah, guys were doing it to stay fit in the winter, and even like Merckx raced some cross. Like that used to be normal, and then I think in that Lance era, it was like it was all about specialization. Lance would like,
yeah.
I'm only gonna race the tour. Everybody felt like you had to narrow it way down, and there's some
Uh,
some advantages to like both approaches or whatever, but it's definitely not gonna ruin you if you do intensity in the off season.
right. Keeping on the human powered health topic, one rider coming from HPH, and we're gonna kind of move over to Project Echelon here, is Scott McGill.
Mm-hmm.
He is like HPH's like key sprinter, and then so he's going to be a real powerhouse in the crits for Project Echelon.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's going to be cleaning up a lot of wins with them.
And they've also picked up Sam Boardman, as we mentioned earlier, who absolute workhorse, one of the riders that, and he had a big win. He won Crybaby Hill last year. Is that right, or was that
He
Alec
did.
Cowan? That was him. That was
No,
Boardman.
Sam Borman won because he was
Okay,
crying. Yeah,
it is gonna make it easier to tell those two apart now that they're on different teams because
right.
they had the mustache, they had the flow. It was like you had to look for the specific earring on one or the other
Yeah.
earring or armband or like a tiny signifier to be like who's who, especially on these grainy like streams. So it'll be
Also,
easy to tell this year.
speaking of grainy crit streams, my hope for 2024 is that we bump it up to 480p.
I don't even need 480. If we could get a consistent like, I don't even need 60 FPS either. If we could get like 30 FPS and 1080p coming in
No,
clean.
no, 480p is worse than 1080.
Oh, I'm saying.
It's been it's
Oh,
been like it's
I
been
thought
like
you were saying.
MySpace quality video
Yeah, I
stream.
went 4K in my mind.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah, 480 without any artifacting, without any of those like cubes when the camera pans or something.
yeah,
Yeah, with all of the series this year, this is gonna be. We got spoiled by a year or two where like ACC was the only thing, all the streams were consistent and good, and we weren't having to chase. Like you knew you could go to their website and find the stream, and we've
yeah.
talked about why they should be on YouTube and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think this year there's going to be a lot of chasing them down. So we will try to help you find them. If you can't find them, we're going to be on top of it. So if you're looking for
Yep.
races, stay tuned to the YouTube channel. If you're listening on a podcast, Jonathan Crane on YouTube, youtube.com/Jonathan Crane is where the show lives in a video format. And if you're only finding this because it popped up in your YouTube, you can listen to this, The American Peloton, on all of the podcast players. And there's a lot of stuff I switch back and forth where, like, if I'm sitting eating, I'll watch the video of it. And if I'm going out for a ride, I'll throw on the audio. So,
I think one last thing to hit on before we close it out is a team, the Cliff Bar team. They've
mm-hmm.
been like an
Well,
OG crit squad,
no longer
and
Cliff
now
Bar.
it's right. I was gonna
Yeah.
get to that. So it's Cliff Bar. So what happened with that was Cliff Bar said, "Hey, we don't want to sponsor the team anymore," and so the Cliff family, who sold Cliff Bar the brand,
Mm-hmm.
said, "You know what? We still want to have a team." So they are sponsored. They have their team called the Cliff Family Drifters,
Mm-hmm.
Like that's pretty much been headed up by the Mallory brothers the past couple of years. They've got two interesting additions. So
Mm-hmm.
with that, unfortunately, a team that you and I were really excited about last year, Empire Cycling, has folded. They were a really cool team out of Salt Lake. With that, the guy who was running Empire, Pat Casey, is moving over to Cliff Family Drifters. He'll be a pretty strong role player for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then also coming over from a really small Southeast Cat 1 team called Paceline Project is Oliver Flout, moving to Cliff Family Drifters as well. We kind of talked about him being a really, really strong pickup for them and finally like having a good front of race guy. I
Mm-hmm.
think with Casey and the Mallory brothers helping him, I think he'll get some really solid results this year.
Yeah, I think that's probably good for Cliff all around. Pat Casey lives out in Utah now, but he was here in Alabama. Like when I first got into it, he was the fast guy on our Tuesday World group ride that was ripping it apart and winning all the cyclocross races around here. So he's been around for a long time and racing like national level races for a long
Yep.
time. So they're gonna have a really like one super experienced rider, one younger rider. Hopefully that's a good balance for them. Yeah, I guess off-season episode we're gonna try and keep it a little bit shorter this time, and like and subscribe. I always forget to tell everyone all of the important stuff, YouTube stuff, until the end. But you got anything else before we go?
Just looking forward to a great 2024 and hopefully like if you see us at any of the national races, come say hi. We're friendly.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just that's about it. And support our sponsors too, our team
Oh, for sure.
sponsors.
Yeah. Yeah, it was awesome last year to pretty much any race we went to. I had somebody ask me if I was Jonathan Crane and tell me they listened to the podcast or watched the channel or something, which,
Yep.
and it was fun to talk to everybody. Nice to meet people. Yeah, we really appreciate it. So if you're enjoying it, also, I guess share it with some people too. The YouTube algorithm does not like a long form podcast. It doesn't like to show it to more people because it's niche, it's long. But if you know other people who want to know about American road racing, send it their way. We'll see you guys out there. Swamp Classic,
Swamp Classic, Auburn,
Auburn.
then Mobile Cycling Classic,
Yeah,
then it is North Beast Classic, and then it's ACC or
yeah.
not
Then it's
ACC, USA Crits.
yeah, newly back. So yeah, check us out. Seek us out at any of those early season things if you're looking to tune the legs up like we are, and we'll see you out there.
Yeah,
Thanks. See you guys
peace.
later.